Across the country, Harley trikes are hitting dealership floors and auction blocks in numbers no one expected. Prices are falling harder than they have in over a decade, and Harley sure isn't talking about it publicly. But the financial pressure behind this dump is very real, and the people who feel it first are everyday riders. Floor plan debt, oversupply, and credit tightening have created the perfect storm. Stick with me to the end, because if you own one, the next few months could decide exactly how much your machine is actually worth. The day the dealerships went silent. Walk into a Harley dealership today, and the first thing you notice is the silence. Not the calm kind that settles during winter, but the heavy, uneasy kind that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. The doors open. The air smells faintly of rubber and wax, and yet nothing moves. Trikes line the floor in long, perfect rows, each one spotless, each one untouched, each one giving off the same quiet message. Something is wrong. Veteran riders feel it the moment they step inside. It is the same instinct that kept them alive on dark highways and in rough weather. The room feels staged, like a showroom in a magazine, spread rather than a real dealership ready to sell machines meant to be ridden hard. Every trike wears a tag that has been crossed out once, then again, and in some cases, a third time. The marker ink looks desperate, numbers falling lower each week. Salesmen stand behind the counter, pretending to check paperwork. Nobody makes eye contact because they do not want to answer questions they have already heard all day. Riders wander between the aisles, staring at machines that should have moved months ago. It feels like time froze, and this quiet, this stillness, is only the first sign of something far bigger waiting outside the showroom walls. What riders witnessed in those silent showrooms was only the first crack in the dam. If you want straight talk on what is really happening behind these numbers, make sure you like this video and subscribe for the updates. Dealers never say out loud. Share your thoughts as well, because riders watching this see the same shifts unfolding nationwide. The sudden appearance of 1 million trikes. The tipping point came when riders started comparing notes online, in garages, and at weekend coffee meets. Trikes were appearing everywhere at once, not in dozens or even hundreds, but in quantities nobody could explain. Listings flooded classified pages. Storage yards showed new rows that had not been there a week prior. Social feeds filled with dealers announcing markdowns large enough to make seasoned riders squint and reread the numbers. The scale was unreal. More than 1 million Harley trikes hitting the market at nearly the same moment does not happen by coincidence. That kind of volume has weight. It reshapes the landscape, whether anyone is prepared or not. In warehouses across multiple states, machines sat, stacked in tight formation, their crates marked only with routing codes and delivery numbers. Drivers reported late-night drop-offs. Some even spoke quietly about shipments, arriving with no usual fanfare, just a clipboard signature and a reminder to keep things moving fast. For riders who have watched the industry for decades, the entire situation felt off. Motorcycles do not just materialize in every corner of the country unless something behind the scenes has snapped. And while dealerships tried to spin it as a seasonal push or a promotional cycle, the truth was easy to feel. The supply was far larger than any normal sales plan could ever justify. That tidal wave of trikes didn't appear by magic. The real story starts inside the factory gates. Everything I wear, carry, and depend on the same gear that's outlasted every cycle is linked right below this video. The internal factory choices behind the oversupply. Inside the plants, the story took on a sharper edge. As retail demand softened, many expected production to slow in step, the way it used to decades ago. But the line kept running. Welders stayed busy, assembly kept humming, and the rhythm of a full manufacturing cycle continued long after the market signaled caution. Those inside the system knew why. Cutting production is expensive. Contracts with suppliers lock in minimum purchases. Breaking those agreements triggers penalties that can cost more than building motorcycles nobody ordered. So the line stayed alive, hour after hour, week after week, because shutting down would have bruised the financial books even harder. Management hoped demand would rebound. They counted on spring surges and loyal touring riders stepping back in. But when orders weakened instead of rising, the warehouses filled. Crates stacked deeper. Completed trikes waited for routing, yet more kept coming. Workers on the floor saw the writing forming long before executives addressed it. They saw more machines leaving the line with no clear destination. They saw staging areas swell past comfortable limits. And they kept building, Because that was the job, and because production targets mattered more than the cracks forming beneath them. The oversupply was not an accident. It was momentum refusing to slow down. But once those trikes left the factory and hit dealer floors, another pressure took over, one that forced the entire dump into full collapse speed. The floor plan debt bomb dealers couldn't outrun. Most riders know how to wrench, negotiate, and ride through storms. But very few ever think about how dealerships actually afford to keep new machines on the floor. Nearly every new trike sitting under showroom lights is financed through what the industry calls a floor plan. The dealer borrows against each unit, paying interest every single day that the machine remains unsold. When the market is steady, that system works. Bikes move, payments clear, everyone stays afloat. But when a tidal wave of inventory arrives and demand drops at the same time, that interest clock becomes a threat. Dealers watch their margins shrink as the days pile up. What began as a steady trickle of costs grows into a flood of red ink. The larger the inventory, the faster the bleed. And with tanks full of untouched trikes stretching wall to wall, the numbers stop making sense. Some dealers faced thousands in monthly interest alone. Others saw their entire profit margin erased before a single machine left the lot. That pressure breaks even the toughest operations. Discounting becomes survival. Markdowns turn brutal. Anything to get a unit off the floor before the debt swallows the business. And this is what finally triggered the massive dump across the country. Once that pressure hit the street, the evidence started showing up where the market speaks the loudest. Auction lanes resetting. Trike prices overnight. If you really want to know the truth behind this collapse, you have to follow the sound of cold concrete, rolling engines, and quick bids echoing through Friday morning auction lanes. These are not glossy showroom floors. They are bare, unfiltered markets where metal meets reality. Dealers gather before sunrise, coffee in hand, clipboards tucked under their arms, watching trikes roll across the block one after another. No chrome lighting, no showroom shine. Just engines, odometers, and numbers called out with no hesitation. In a normal year, a clean trike with respectable mileage brings a solid price, something that shows healthy demand. But this year, lanes across Ohio, Nevada, and the Carolinas told a very different story. Trikes that once held their value with stubborn pride started clearing for shockingly low figures. It happened fast. One sale sets the baseline, then another sale confirms it, and before long, the lane price becomes the truth no dealer can escape. Retail dreams do not matter here. Emotion does not matter here. If a machine clears at a certain figure in the lane, every dealer takes that number home, whether they like it or not. That is why experienced riders trust auctions more than marketing. Auctions expose what people are actually willing to pay, not what brochures claim something is worth. And once these low clears started stacking up week after week, the ripple hit the entire market with no chance to slow down. But the numbers on the block were only the beginning, because the real damage showed up when owners tried to understand what their trikes were worth afterward, how the resale curve for trikes collapsed. Resale value has always been a point of pride for many Harley riders. You take care of your machine, keep it clean, keep the record straight, and you expect it to hold some weight when the day comes to trade or sell. But when auction numbers fall as quickly as they did, the resale curve bends in ways that feel almost unfair. Appraisers call it the anchor effect. Once a certain model clears consistently at a low number, that number becomes the new floor. Even if your trike has fewer miles, better accessories, or flawless paint, the market does not care. It bends to the anchor and drags everything down with it. Longtime owners began seeing thousands in equity vanish almost overnight. Machines they kept spotless suddenly looked like liabilities. They walked into dealerships expecting the old handshake and a solid offer, only to hear numbers that felt like gut punches. Many thought it was a mistake at first, maybe a new salesman lowballing to make a margin. But it was not one dealer. It was not one region. It was the entire valuation system adjusting to the new reality created upstream. The emotional hit was heavy. Riders who had put real miles and real memories into their trikes found themselves staring at valuations that did not reflect care, pride, or history. The curve had broken, and once it snaps, it does not return quickly. And as riders tried to make sense of the shrinking numbers, another hidden factor surfaced, one stamped right into the neck of every machine. Domestic versus imported trikes. Every rider knows the 17 characters stamped into a motorcycle tell its entire life story. But during this trike collapse, those characters began to separate values in ways many did not see coming. The VN prefix, especially the first few letters tied to manufacturing origin, became a dividing line. Experienced riders who have spent decades studying engines, frames, and assembly quirks picked up on it first. Domestic-built trikes held their value slightly better, while imported units slipped faster, sometimes by margins that surprised even seasoned appraisers. Tariff-linked costs played a role. Freight charges added weight as well. When times were good, these quiet price differences hid inside dealer margins or manufacturer incentives. But when prices started falling, every hidden cost suddenly mattered. Two identical trikes with the same paint, the same mileage, and the same accessories could chart completely different resale paths simply because their VIN prefixes differed. Riders began decoding VNs at home before stepping foot into a dealership. Forums lit up with discussions about origin codes, assembly lines, and which prefixes triggered steeper drops. This was not speculation. It was math meeting market stress. In a collapsing environment, even small manufacturing distinctions widen into big pricing gaps. Riders who wanted to protect their wallets had to read the numbers stamped into the metal before trusting anything printed on a tag. But as riders sharpened their knowledge and tried to outthink the market, another force appeared that no amount of research could fully control: the credit crunch that crushed trike demand. When interest rates rise, the entire motorcycle world feels it, but trike buyers get hit especially hard. These machines already sit at higher price brackets, and when borrowing costs climb, monthly payments can jump into uncomfortable territory fast. Over the last year, lenders tightened approvals in ways older riders had not seen in decades. Applications that would have passed quickly during earlier seasons now stalled, flagged, or declined outright. Interest rates that once floated around manageable figures climbed into ranges that forced riders to walk away before signing. Repossession numbers rising in the used market only hardened lender caution. Repos feed back into supply, adding even more trikes to an already saturated environment. Lenders saw the writing on the wall. They responded by tightening criteria, raising minimum credit thresholds, and shrinking loan offers. Riders who had bought and financed motorcycles for 30 or 40 years without issue suddenly found themselves hearing the word no. It created a feedback loop. Higher rates led to fewer buyers. Fewer buyers led to more unsold units. More unsold units pushed dealerships into deeper discount territory. And all of it reduced demand for new machines just when Harley needed the opposite. The credit system, once a reliable bridge, had turned into a locked gate. With credit tightening and demand stalling, the real consequences began unfolding far beyond the sales floor. Inside Milwaukee, leadership shakeups and silent signals. When riders talk about what went wrong, most point to the dealerships or the prices. But the earliest warnings came from Milwaukee long before the public felt the shock. The tone inside boardrooms shifted months before anyone admitted trouble. Executives started replacing bold language with colder corporate terms like discipline, alignment, and reset, words older riders have learned to treat as quiet confessions. Those words usually appear only when a company is bracing rather than building. They signal the moment when optimism fades and damage control begins. The CEO transition only deepened suspicion. Leadership changes at calm times arrive with celebration and clear direction. Leadership changes during storms arrive quietly, tucked behind short press releases and interviews that avoid specifics. The shift felt less like strategy and more like retreat. And riders who have lived through decades of Harley ups and downs recognized the pattern instantly. Product pullbacks followed, color options trimmed, accessories reduced, limited editions quietly delayed. Small choices to the casual observer, but meaningful signals to riders who know how manufacturers behave under pressure. Corporate behavior was not loud, but the silence itself became a message. Harley did not need to announce trouble. Their restraint already spoke for them. It was a language veteran riders understood without needing translation. And while the signals from Milwaukee created concern, the deeper emotional blow came from the street, where loyalty itself began to crack. When badge pride loses its power among veteran riders. For decades, the badge carried power. It meant history, brotherhood, and the roar of true American touring. Older riders could roll into any lot, any gathering, and feel an instant connection just from the emblem on their tank. That pride held through recessions, gas spikes, and cultural shifts. But during this trike collapse, something far heavier broke than price tags. Riders began comparing their older touring machines to the newer trikes, and for the first time, the badge alone was not enough to bridge the gap. The older bikes felt built from steel and sweat, while many newer machines felt sculpted by committees. The gulf between nostalgia and present-day engineering widened, and riders who once defended the brand with unwavering loyalty found themselves pausing before speaking up. As values dropped, the badge no longer protected resale the way it once did. Veteran riders felt that shift deep in their gut. A name that once guaranteed dignity at trade-in suddenly offered no shield at all. Machines that carried them across states, mountains, and milestones now looked like numbers sliding the wrong direction on dealership screens. The emotional cost hit harder than any financial one. It was not about losing money. It was about losing certainty in a symbol they once trusted without question. And as that trust weakened, the next blow arrived in the place many riders considered sacred. The dealerships that had anchored their communities for generations. If you want the truth before the industry tries to smooth it over, subscribe and stay with the channel. The next wave of changes is already forming, and riders who stay informed will navigate it with confidence long before the headlines catch up. The dealership attrition spreading across America. Across the Midwest and the South, dealerships that had stood for decades began to dim their lights. These were not flashy city showrooms, but long-standing community landmarks where Saturday mornings smelled like coffee, warm engines, and the leather of well-worn jackets. Many riders bought their first big touring machine in one of these shops. They shook hands with owners who remembered their names, their families, and the routes they favored. So when the closures started, riders felt it like losing a hometown bar or an old diner that carried half a lifetime of stories. Some dealerships did not close outright, but merged into multi-brand floors. What once was a shrine to American V-twins now shared space with imports, adventure bikes, or side-by-sides. The transformation felt strange and foreign to riders who grew up seeing the Harley sign as a beacon. The identity of these places changed overnight. The chrome displays shrank. The walls lost their memorabilia. The staff shifted. The soul felt thinner. Communities around these dealerships suffered as well. Local riding groups lost their rally points. Charity events vanished. Weekend rides that started from the same parking lots for 20 or 30 years suddenly had no home. The attrition spread quietly, one shop at a time, until patterns emerged that could no longer be ignored. And while dealership signs came down, another quieter crisis unfolded in the factories and towns that had built the brand's legacy for generations. The factory slowdown and the towns built around it. In the towns that grew alongside Harley's factories, the slowdown felt personal. These were not just production lines, they were lifelines. Families built their futures around steady shifts, overtime hours, and the pride that came from crafting machines loved across the country. But as demand faltered and inventories ballooned, the first cuts came quietly. Overtime disappeared. Second shifts evaporated. Crews that once stayed late to keep the lines moving now clocked out early because there was no reason to stay. The sound inside the plants changed. Where there had been non-stop rhythm compressors cycling, welders sparking, engines rolling, now gaps of silence stretched between tasks. Local businesses felt the drop immediately. Diners that filled 3 times a day during peak seasons lost their busiest hours. Gas stations that relied on shift changes saw slower pumps. Tool suppliers trimmed orders. Neighborhoods that had celebrated new model launches with pride now waited with uncertainty. The economic weight spread outward like a slow wave, touching every street, every family, every small shop connected to the factory heartbeat. But the emotional weight ran deeper. Workers who had given decades felt the pressure not as lost income, but as fading purpose. A factory slowdown is not just a dip in output, it is a shift in identity for entire towns built on industry, craftsmanship, and the pride of knowing their work mattered. Those towns weren't the only ones feeling the hit. Riders themselves started adapting in ways no spreadsheet predicted. How data-savvy riders are outsmarting the market. A shift happens whenever a market goes through chaos. The riders who pay close attention start to pull ahead of the ones who rely only on instinct. Over the last year, more and more experienced riders have turned to data as their first tool, not their last. They watch auction results the same way investors watch stock tickers. They compare week-to-week price swings, studying how trikes clear on Friday mornings and matching those numbers against dealership listings in their home states. They keep spreadsheets that track asking prices, sale prices, and trends that repeat themselves every season. The data does not just help them negotiate, it helps them predict. Riders now decode VIN prefixes, track patterns, and study cycles, giving them leverage once held only by dealers. Information replaces guesswork, letting them spot desperation and wait for the right moment. This data-driven approach is purposeful survival, not cold calculation. And that deeper understanding prepared riders for something rarer than a discount, something that comes along only once every long stretch in the motorcycle world. The once-in-a-decade buying window. A buying window like this does not appear often, especially in the trike world. Hundreds of thousands of units flooding the market at once create a distortion that older riders have seen only a handful of times in their lives. Most remember moments in the 1980s or the early 2000s when certain models dropped hard and stayed low for a year or two before stabilizing. But a full-scale trike dump, with numbers reaching into 7 figures across the country, is something entirely different. It creates opportunity, but only for those who approach it with discipline. A real deal depends on timing, leverage, and patience, not stickers. Cash shifts negotiations, and seasoned riders wait for seasonal drops and clean units. This buying window is not about chasing the cheapest trike, but choosing wisely while the market briefly favors caution over impulse. But even with smart timing and clean buys, the shadow cast by this collapse will stretch far past today's deals. The resale shadow that will shape prices for years. A market collapse does not simply reset. It leaves a shadow, a long-shaped curve that stretches into future seasons and pulls values downward even after demand begins to recover. Trikes carry that shadow even heavier because their buyer base is narrower and more price-sensitive. When wholesale numbers dropped this year, they planted anchors that future valuations will measure against for a long time. Even if sales rebound or supply tightens, those anchors remain part of the historical record. Appraisers look backward before they look forward, and once several quarters show weakened numbers, the entire model line resets around them. Buyers should expect a slow, cautious recovery in values, not a sharp rebound. Today's low prices demand realistic expectations. These trikes are for riding, not flipping. The shadow is real, but it only erases quick profit myths, not the joy or longevity of a good ride. And as riders accept this new landscape, the bigger question turns to Harley itself and how the company plans to navigate the road ahead. Harley's reset plan. As the market shifts, Harley faces decisions that will define its next decade. The company cannot outwait the storm. It has to reshape itself. One of the first visible steps came through model shrinkage. Fewer trims, fewer paint options, and fewer limited editions signal a focus on tightening the lineup rather than stretching it thin. Pricing adjustments followed, not always through visible reductions, but through subtle realignments where freight, setup, and material costs get absorbed or redistributed. These moves do not shout change, but they mark the beginning of a reset. Union negotiations add another dimension. Workers want stability, guaranteed hours, and respect for the craftsmanship that built the brand's reputation. Harley wants flexibility to match shifting global demand. The two sides must find common ground, or risk repeating past eras when disconnects between labor and management slowed progress. Global competition is rising fast, and Harley must balance heritage with innovation to stay relevant. Riders want honesty, consistency, and machines worthy of their trust. If Harley embraces real recalibration, this reset becomes an opportunity, and the spirit of riding endures beyond the market. That's the real story behind this trike dump, brother. Whether you ride a two-wheeler, a trike, or you're thinking about buying one, this shift is going to affect every one of us on the road. Now, I want to hear from you. What are you seeing at your local dealers? Drop your experience in the comments and let the rest of the community know. If this breakdown helped you, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next deep dive we've got coming.